Appreciation course, yeah. Okay, class, today we're going to talk about the Romantic period. A few of the characteristics. This does not by any means cover all the characteristics in the Romantic period, but just a few of them. So that being said, there's two there. Okay. Now, one thing about the Romantic period is when it started, many new genres came up, and these are just a few of them. One popular one that came about was piano character pieces. These included things such as nocturnes, ballads, and etudes, and many other genres, really, that many composers are famous for. You also have the production of Lieder, which is a German or Dutch word which literally translates to English as song or songs. Lieder were very popular by such composers like Schubert, Schumann, and the like. They were most of the time German poems that would be set to music. And finally, we have song cycles, which kind of relate back to Lieder. A song cycle would essentially be multiple Lieder that would be sung in sequence with each other that have an overarching story or all relate to each other. So you're telling one story over the course of multiple songs. One of the earliest examples of a song cycle was Beethoven's An die Fremde. As an example of a Lieder, we're going to listen to a short segment of An die Musik by Franz Schubert. That's enough for right now. We'll come back to this piece again in a little bit. So, Lieder were kind of this start of what we think of today when we hear songs. You have people such as Josh Groban who make their entire living on making songs, with obviously accompaniment behind them. But it was kind of the start of just a singer's song. Now, looking melodically at some of the characteristics of the Romantic period is that composers would take the melody of a song and give it much more importance and emphasize it much more than previously in the classical period. Many people often looked at songs in the Romantic period as a defined melody with background accompaniment. These composers would create very, very distinct melodies in comparison to the classical period. Many of these would have vastly wide ranges across the melody, with such composers as Giacomo Puccini and the like, and which we will go through a little bit later. That being said, some of these characteristics of melody, I want us to think about them as we listen to this one more time. One last characteristic we'll look at for the Romantic period is the use of rhythm and rhythmic devices. The rhythms incorporated with the period, the Romantic period, were much more complex than in the previous classical period. Some of the devices that composers would use would be the use of more immediate and more often meter changes, more compound meters, and the use of tempo rubato. All these concepts were still used in the classical period, as we know, but to a much higher and more often degree in the Romantic period. Some composers would write entire works that would be so focused on certain individual rhythmic devices, such composers as Chopin, Wagner, and Schumann. Now, as an example of some of these characteristics of rhythm, we're going to listen to this one more time, just a short section of it, and see if we can outline any of these rhythmic devices that might be used in it. If you listen to the melody and the song as we're listening to it, we can hear it kind of has this tempo rubato feel. It's very easy, it's free flowing, it doesn't have a specific beat behind it. Also of the like, we'll listen to Liebestraum number 3 by Franz Liszt. Now in this piece, it's easy to see some of the complexities of the rhythm as we're listening. You can hear this melody and this accompaniment kind of clash with each other rhythmically as we hear these quarter and eighth notes on top with these underlying triplets underneath that cause this dissonance of rhythm almost. It's very interesting to listen to. And if you also listen again, you can feel the tempo rubato feel that Franz Liszt puts into it. And lastly, we'll look at a piece that was done during the late Romantic period called La Bohème by Giacomo Puccini. Puccini was a late Romantic era composer, very, very prolific operatic composer. He composed 14 operas, if I'm not mistaken. La Bohème, which is one of his most famous, debuted in Turin, Italy in 1896. It's one of my favorite pieces personally. It's the story about these two lovers who fall in love with each other on their first encounter. It's really purely love at first sight kind of stuff. And they stay together for so long until one day they start making these excuses with each other why they shouldn't be with each other, because in reality, Mimi is very, very ill. And they make these excuses because neither one of them can really cope with the fact that one day they'll lose each other since Mimi is very ill and she's not getting any better. So they decide to stay together until the spring because no one wants to be alone. So eventually spring does come and they part ways until one day Mimi, with the aid of her friend Musetta, comes into Rodolfo, which is the male protagonist, into his house, his room, because he was with roommates, into the place where he lives, and she's on death's doorstep. Doesn't have much longer, and the two share this rekindled love for a brief moment, just in time before Mimi passes away. It's very, very sad, and it's very compelling, is the word. We'll look at a short song from the piece called O Soave Fanciulla. This is right after the two have just met, and they're falling for each other so fast. This is right before they say, I love you for the first time. And it's a very compelling piece. O soave fanciulla, dolce viso, mi vite circa confusa al Okay, class, I greatly recommend you look at this piece further because it's so beautiful. All of the music written for it. There's amazing work there. But before we go, I'd like to ask you guys for next time if you could go home and do a little bit of research on the Romantic period and maybe come back with a piece that you found that reflects some of these ideas in the Romantic period, rhythmically, melodically, or in the respective genres. And then next time we'll have a brief discussion about some of those pieces.